Okay, so community. A community is a reflection of what we crave, belonging. Belonging is the heart of human connection. Our hardwiring is to be social creatures and to need one another. We cannot become our best selves without feeling like we belong to a tribe that sees us, respects us, and lifts us up. A sense of belonging can be fostered in many ways: food, music, volunteering, a cause. You can scan a room and see a diversity of backgrounds, ages, and skill sets. Yet the common thread is shared desires and aspirations. It's magnificently profound how simple this connection is, how deeply we all crave it, and how it changes the trajectory of our lives. Today's speaker is Michael Dunlavey. He is one of the founding members of Sacramento's modern creative community. Michael has designed over 500 corporate identity programs in his 40-year career as a graphic designer, environmental designer, and a restaurant designer. He founded the Dunlavey Studio with his wife, Lindy, in 1978, where he served as president and creative director. Now a watercolor painter, he draws inspiration from his extensive travel experiences throughout the world. He has demonstrated a deep love for and commitment to the arts community and has sat on the board of directors of the Crocker Art Museum Association for 11 years and the Sacramento Region Community Foundation for 10. So today, we are structuring our talk a little bit differently. You might have noticed there's stools up here. Our guest has so much experience in the creative community. He's one of the founding members of ADAC, the Art Directors and Artists Club, which probably most of you don't remember. I do. I was in Sacramento for just a couple years while it was still happening. And I wanted to hear from his perspective, how he started it, how we can keep our community going. So he has so much experience in this community, we decided we'd rather take this opportunity to pick his brain and ask the questions we really wanted answered. So Britt Wesley, she's one of our lovely organizers and works with individuals and businesses to tell their story. So she's so great at getting at the heart of a person's story. I asked her to sit with Michael, brave her stage fright, and chat about his career. It's going to be great. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A still. So Britt, I will let you take it from here. Go ahead. Welcome, guys.
Morning, everyone.
Hi there.
You're going to take it, so go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. So I thought we could maybe start this off by having you tell us a little bit about when you fell in love with art and when you discovered that you could make a career out of it.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out how to make a career out of it. But I knew I was going to be an artist when I was about 11 years old. And the reason is I was exposed to it at a young age. My father was an engineer and a watercolorist, and my mother was a ballerina and taught ballet. And the amazing part is that I was exposed to all these creative talents, and then my wife, Lindy, there's no artist in her background, and yet she rose to probably be the top graphic designer in the whole region. And so it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you're somewhat born with it and exposed to it, and other times not at all. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about what it was like in the old days. I remember the covered wagons when they came across from St. Louis. This is way before the arch, So anyway, I went to high school with John Sutter. I don't know if you have ever heard of him. He has that fort place, He did pretty well. And then his buddy James Marshall discovered gold, and that's while I was still in high school. So we were quite close. But anyway, I want to tell you a little bit more detail, a little bit more personal background, and talk about the pitfalls of starting your own business, but the things you have to get over in life that sometimes are shocking and that you never thought would happen. And I would go back to to college. And I was at Sac State. Anybody heard of that before? That's the old name of the school. CUS something now, I know. And I was a fine art major, and I would say graphic design, but they hadn't invented the term. It was called commercial art. And the two departments hated each other, and I was one of the few people that went between both of them. And I always thought I was going to be a fine artist, and I had actually had about 11 one-man shows of my paintings by the time I was 19. And then I discovered that the frames cost more than the paintings, and I knew it was not a good plan. So fortunately, I could also do design. So I was just working away at Sac State. I was 8 units short of my master's, and I got an envelope in the mail from the United States saying, "We would like you to go to visit Vietnam." I thought, that was really cool. What an opportunity, you know. So I was 5'10", but I think I weighed about 124 pounds. So I wasn't really into hand-to-hand combat. So I joined the Navy and was on the USS Turner Joy. And those of you who remember your history, the Turner Joy and the Maddox were attacked supposedly by the North Vietnamese Navy, which they didn't even have. But President Johnson used that to expand the war and to go from 40,000 people up to 350,000 fighters. And so it wasn't until I was like probably 10 years ago that I did a little research on the Turner Joy. And we had the same captain, and luckily for me, it was 3 years after. And that attack, the Turner Joy was never hit, even though we believed it was, you know. And so they just used that as a way to increase the level of the war.
And Michael, you were saying that while you were in Vietnam, that you kind of took new ways to keep that creativity alive. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I did. Since I was a college graduate and I was 23, I was about the age of the officers. And so they kind of left me alone because I got to do cartoons that ranked on all the officers, and I put them up in the mess decks. And later I was this is one of my crowning achievements, I was the art editor of the cruise book, which is really impressive, you know. And I did drawings out, with black ink. We had no supplies, and so I used to collect people's ashes from the ashtrays, and I would make my own paint by adding water to it and smearing it around there. And so we had no budget, obviously. So when I got out, then I came back home, and I had worked 5 years at the Sacramento Bee in the art department. And my teacher, Dr. DeWitt Whistler Jane, he was a descendant of Whistler, he talked to me early on when I was a junior, and he said, you know, I think you're motivated by grades. And it's like, isn't everybody, you know? But he said, I think you have a chance of being one of the few professional designers in my class, and I'm going to work you twice as hard as everybody else. I'm going to give you really tough assignments because I want you to learn, and the highest grade, while I'm your teacher, will be a B. So if you get a B, think of it as an A. So I respected that, and then oh, there I am now. See, I was young once there. So anyway, what it did is he motivated me. He got me a job at the Bee, and I worked 40 hours a week and had 17 units. And then something tragically happened in our life. My mother had a stroke and passed away in 17 hours at the age of 50 years old. And that was a terrible time in my life. And we were not married at the time. And then 6 months later, Lindy's mother died at 56. And so these were really tough times that we had to get through. So I left the Bee after the service and went to become the art director at Graphic Center, which was a large printing company, and Lindy was the designer. And when they hired me, Lindy had no idea that I was the art director until we started comparing salaries one time, and mine was higher. She says, what's this all about? I said, well, I'm the art director. She says, you are? No one ever told her, you know, that's that kind of deal. So anyway, we, about 2 weeks before we were going to get married, we both got fired, which, any of you been fired? Raise your hands. Oh, that's not enough. Okay, be honest. How many have been fired? Come on, let's see. Oh, different hands. Okay. All right. So it actually was a blessing because we were going to just go to Carmel for a week. Instead, we said, well, let's take off, and we drove across the country to New York and went to Nantucket in Massachusetts, and I introduced Lindy to my relatives from upstate New York. And so anyway, when we got back, I worked actually for 6 months as an art director for an ad agency. That's a real secure job. And what happened was then, Lindy and I, we really hated Sacramento. We wanted to get out of here and see what else is out there. So we went to visit her sister, who was living in Karachi, Pakistan. And believe me, Sacramento looks pretty good after you go to Karachi, Pakistan. So I told Lindy, I was down at the travel agent, and I said, how'd you like to go around the world? She says, what do you mean around the world? She says, I've never been east of Reno. So she has now. She says, we spent 10 months and went around the world and went to 23 countries. And we were doing really well until I was in Tehran and I drank the water. And I ended up in the hospital in Karachi, Pakistan with amoebic dysentery and hepatitis. Went from 150 to 120 in 3 weeks. And that is not a good way to diet. And speaking of diet, I almost died. I stopped breathing at one time at 26. I said, well, it's been a fun life, you know. And so Lindy hit my chest a few times, and I came out of it. And so when we came home, we had to cut the trip short by 2 months. And that's what we did.
What year was that?
1831.
So Michael, tell us a little bit about...
1971.
Tell us a little bit about when you and Lindy decided to create your studio.
Oh, well, that was easy because after we came back, I was too weak to work. So it took me a year to get my strength back. So Lindy came to work with me at the ad agency, and we worked there for 8 years. And then all of a sudden, it went bankrupt. And we had just bought a 3-story redwood home in Placer County. And we thought, you know, why don't we start our own company? Because we want to continue working together. And we had $300 in the bank. You know, that was a lot of money.
That's such a big risk, especially when you have a house and you're both going into it together. Why did you decide to start your studio instead of just going to work for someone else?
Well, we could have worked for someone. And one of the top designers, Bob Ricella, had this really cool Victorian downtown. And he wanted to hire us. So he had really cool stained glass all over in front of all the windows upstairs. He says, let me show you where you work. So he took us down to the basement with no windows and a 7-foot ceiling. We thought, no, maybe we would do our own thing. So we did. We started it. We had 1 employee and no clients. And, I mean, what could go wrong, you know?
That's great. And I know that over time, you know, you started out with graphic design and eventually kind of started incorporating interiors and restaurant design, and now in retirement you're doing watercolors and photography. Talk to us a little bit about that evolution as a creative.
Well, I think it all goes back to high school at El Camino High School. You know, in the yearbook, they put down what you want to be. I put down general activities, and that's really... That's the story of my life, because I kept changing my major throughout. And even in our 33 years, it evolved totally, my job. I wanted to just be a designer. I didn't want to be an owner. I just want somebody else to bring work to me. And it didn't work out that way. So by day, I would be meeting with clients and my staff, like Kevin Yee right there. Say hi, Kevin. Here, come take this microphone. Yeah. So Kevin worked for us for 24 years, I think. He was like 10 when he came to our studio, right out of San Jose State. And we had 5 people who were with us 21 to 27 years, which is unheard of in any design or creative business. So we have just a wonderful staff.
I know that during that time, you've been responsible for like 14,000 projects, 14,000 design projects over the course of your career,
I was?
right? Yeah, that's what you say.
I wouldn't say responsible. Yeah, that's the key word.
So I wonder, you know, when we're looking at this slideshow of all these different projects that you've been on, that you've been a part of all around Sacramento, some that are so iconic, like the can that's on the front of this building, right?
Did anybody see the can this morning on your way?
Yeah.
Okay, that was going to be my trick question. raise your hand if you recognize anything, and then we were going to show the can, but I missed that opportunity. So.
Tell us what it's like to drive around Sacramento and the region and see your life's work.
It's scary, because sometimes I'll drive around and I see something every block, and I'll say, no, we didn't do that, you know. But most of it is, a lot of it is still up. The things that I see most of is probably signage, more so than restaurants. Even though I designed over 50 restaurants, ones that are still around would be like the Firehouse and Frank Fats, California Fats, Seasons in Davis, and things like that. And it's kind of fun to see it, and it makes me feel good about it.
That's great. And you know what I really was interested in talking with you about is how much you fostered a creative community in Sacramento in your time, you know, through ADAC and through the Envision conference that you started.
All right.
You were a really busy guy. You've clearly done a lot of projects. Why was that so important to you to not only be part of that community, but to be one of the leaders?
There's that word again, community. You see, I've avoided it up till now, but that's okay. The design community was really pretty strong in the early years, and the Art Directors and Artists Club was a sleepy organization in the early 70s, and Michael Kennedy and Gwen Amos and Frank Burris and I were the young board people who thought the annual dues of $35 a year was too much. So we lowered to $5 a year, because they only had about 35 members, and they would show their favorite job of the week at a real boring lunch meeting once a month. And so we wanted to do more. We wanted to bring in top speakers and all. And I inherited, when I was the president in 1974, treasury of $35. That's how much we had. And over the years, we built it up, believe it or not, to $182,000 we had in the bank. And how did we do that? The different design firms would, yeah, there's someone who wants to know right here. We thought we'd build our own building and everything, you know, we were just rolling. And anyway, the real secret is, and this is, you got to be paying attention here, Rebecca.
Listening.
Okay, was that each of the design firms would do design for a month for a nonprofit, and we get to use their space, like the Old Eagle Theater and Sierra 2 and different things. And the brilliant stroke of this was, and we got to keep all the profits from the beer and wine sales. That's the key right there. See, this is too early for beer and wine, probably. Not for all, I guess. But anyway, we built it all up, and we had great plans, and we had the Envision Conference for 25 years. And we would bring top speakers from around the United States. We had Lou Dorsman, the head of CBS.
Why was that
Arthur
something
Paul
that was
of
important
Playboy.
to you, right? Like, so as you're kind of developing this community and bringing in people from the outside, you know, we've talked about this a little bit, how there's a little bit of a tendency in Sacramento to keep things so hyper-local. Why did you feel that it was important to bring in outside speakers from across the country?
Well, we were looking for inspiration. Sac State only had one teacher of graphic design at that time. And Chico State hadn't really developed their department. Davis is more fine art oriented. So we really were not getting inspired. So we wanted to bring in top people from around the United States to inspire us. And that's what we did. And it was, and also the reason we did it was the firms in the past, and in other cities especially, they really look at each other like competitors. We wanted to break that down and work together on things and uplift the entire community. And that's what we did. We became friends with other designers like you're doing here. This is a terrific group, and I'm real excited. I didn't even know it existed a few weeks ago, and now I'm sitting here in this chair. I was like, who are you again, you know? And I'm so excited to see this, because when ADAC closed, which has been several decades, there was a void in the creative community. And so it's terrific to see this in just a few years where it's just exploded throughout the world. I think it's really wonderful.
In addition to, you know, starting these creative communities and fostering that that sense of belonging amongst creatives, you were also very active with nonprofits, being with the Crocker and the Sacramento Region Foundation and involved with Habitat for Humanity. Yeah. Why do you think that it's important to give back to the community?
Well, I think it's critical that you do it, and I've been on board of directors for 37 years, and it's amazing how you can help shape a community just being on a board. And the first board I was on was Sacramento Habitat for Humanity. I was on their board for 7 years. And I've stayed with them as a volunteer for now 22 years. And I'm kind of their official photographer along with Bill Santos. And we shoot all the home dedications of the families. And we donate our time and we give the photographs to Habitat for Humanity, but also to the families who received the keys to their new house. And I never thought of myself as a photographer that shoots people all that well. But when you volunteer, you're going to be blessed too. And I think it gave me a new confidence, that and my 300 millimeter telephoto lens, where I could shoot, I'm right up in their face, And that's one of the reasons I encourage it. Now with the Crocker, I was on the board of directors. There are 35 of us for 11 years. For 10 years, we helped raise $95 million, and our board of 35 personally gave $18 million. So you can get an idea that we all believed in this. And I continue to work with the Crocker. I'm in charge of a group called Guathme's Gang, which is the 35 board members, original board members, and we meet every 6 weeks and we tour artist studios and galleries and museums together, and it's a way to stay connected to the museum. Now with Sacramento Region Community Foundation, you probably heard of the Big Day of Giving, where they raised $7.3 million. Well, when I was on the board, we had about $125 million, and then if any of you have heard of that recession in 2008, that money, which was invested in stocks, became $81 million. So we had to build it back up, and it's well over that now. And so one of the things we did, and I know I'm going to run long, but we raised $400,000 and got a matching $1.6 million from the United States to help people who were losing their homes during 2008. And so we helped save over 400 people who were about to be evicted in the region.
Amazing. And tell us why you really decided to get involved in that way. Again, you had a very busy career with your studio. You're involved with ADAC and Envision. Why was it important to find that time
well, I think you have to give back. I don't think you have a choice. And if you're committed to a community, you really have to support it. And this is one way to do it. And you can't just do lip service. So what I recommend is any of you out that are interested in the community and you want to support a group, write down a few of the nonprofits. There's 4,250 nonprofits in this region, believe it or not. And I didn't just make that up. That's the Region Foundation's number. And approach them, especially if you're good at social media, say. Everyone needs your help. Or if you're a photographer, a writer, whatever it is, go volunteer and help out. I know Habitat is a great organization. They have a women's build, and they go to Nicaragua every year and build homes there. I mean, get involved. It's something you really have to do.
I know that we talked a little bit about this kind of feeling that as someone who's new in their career, that maybe they don't have the ability to be on a board or without having that experience or that reputation. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. A lot of times, if you make yourself known to a group and you volunteer and you express an interest to the executive director that someday you would like to become a board member, it kind of plants a seed. And you can do a lot more as a board member, because actually the executive directors work for the board of directors. And right now, diversity is the key thing for board members. The main problem has been to attract younger people. Most people are building their careers and things. So if you're a young person, a lot of boards are looking for you. If you have that interest, you'd be surprised. But step up, you can make a major difference that way.
Awesome. And I think we're getting close on time, so last question. What parting advice do you have for the people that's in the community today?
Well, as you can see, we've been kind of busy, and we've had our time. This is your time. So I challenge you to go out and make a difference in this community. Take charge. We've done our thing, and whatever you're doing now, at the end of your career, it'll be totally different. Your jobs are going to evolve, so get out there and make a difference. That'd be my advice.
Michael, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. Everyone, Michael.
Well, in part, I think you're doing it right now because you're here. And what I like about this group is the ability to exchange ideas. And you might be meeting here and find your next business partner. Who knows? You know, I like the exchange of ideas, but you need to be open to it. And you can tell by my background, there's a lot of risk in it. You know, and sometimes you have to overcome the fear of risk, and you just go for it. And if you do your best work, you should always do your best work, because that's your reputation. There's no excuses in life. You can't say, well, there wasn't a budget, the deadline was good, they had a printer I didn't like. You know, never apologize for your work. So always do your best. That's what I say. Well, let's see. I think it was number 1,400, because that was the last one. Yeah. If you saw those dresses, you probably wonder what that is. That was the Bridal Mart, and that wasn't my favorite project. But that was one of my last projects where I designed the casino in Rancho Cordova. So, is that a stretch or a question? Oh, okay. But I would like to show, that's it, Fabulous 50s Cafe. Can you go back a couple images there? Okay. So if you saw that burned out looking building, that was a Happy Steak, and it was on Fair Oaks Boulevard in Carmichael, and the owner, Jeff Tay, was from Singapore, and he was young. He wasn't even here in the 50s, but fortunately I was. So from that wreck, I designed the whole building. I did the outside here, and I had a 59 Cadillac and a 58 Edsel crashing into the building, and they just installed it. And I was standing out front, and there was this huge rear-end collision. I thought, God, I'm in trouble. I'm going to be sued forever. But fortunately, that was the only one. And this was probably one of my favorite projects. This was featured in a lot of national magazines, including Architectural Record. And it also led to an award I received from the American Institute of Architects California Council. And anyone who's an architect who's licensed does not like unlicensed people designing buildings. But they gave me a special award when I was in Pasadena, and saying that as saluting a graphic designer, and actually had my name on it, that designed a significant piece of architecture. So that meant a lot to me, coming from the architects. So this was the opening party we had, and Lindy and I dressed up, and we paid off the waitresses to cheer like the rock stars that arrived. When we came in, nobody recognized us, which was kind of funny. So anyway, you can see why. Lindy in her poodle skirt here. But it was like one of the all-time great parties. This is the one in Stockton. And this one stayed open longer than the first one, which was like 2.5 years. You can make a creative space, but if you're not doing the cooking or the service, then it may not stick around. This was funny. This is a Studebaker, and I put it up in the mezzanine. It was an old Moto Day dress shop at one time, and I got a call about 2 months after the opening. They said, we're having a problem where the floor is sinking into the basement because of the weight of the car. I said, really? You have a basement? I didn't even know. That's how loose it was. So we had to shore up all the floor underneath it. These are self-promos, because that old dour fellow was Cormac Dunlavey, and I found him for $2 in a flea market. And because we looked so young, we were 33 when we started our company, that we made him our founder. So we did all these things, like When Irish Ties Are Smiling, and we had Irish band, and we had...
What's with the potato?
Oh, that's the Irish potato. That was a cake. And, so we did really well at the party. All the food was based on the potato until you got to the dessert, and it was just terrible. Well, first of all, you're going to be scared to death because, especially talk about undercapitalized. We had Alice Baker with us for 27 years, and Alice had her own company, but she was our controller. And she also did page design for 25 years, and she was the go-to person for graphic designers. And she would lay out what the problem was, or give me a list of 3 insurance companies, and they come in and do the pitch, and we would always decide who it is. But Alice was terrific, and she kept us in business. Without Alice, it would have been much, much worse or impossible. And Alice just passed away about 6 weeks ago at 83, and she was a wonderful addition to ours and the other designers in Sacramento.
So it sounds like kind of outsourcing the help that you don't want to do so that you can stay creative a bit.
It's not that we don't want to do it. We didn't understand it. You know, we were always employees. And for instance, Lindy was making a big $500 a month, and I was making $525 a month. And we saved her salary for 7 years. We saved it up to buy our house. And so that's, you have to sacrifice, especially if you have your own business, in order to get through it. And it's quite possible. And the reason I told you my kind of backstory is you may be going through similar things, or you may later on, but there's hope. Well, that's a good question, because it was on for about 40 years. But what it did is it united us as artists and less as competitors. And it lifted all the boats, basically, because it made us all better. And we also did the Business by Design conference for about 10 years at the same time. And these conferences took about 50 or 60 volunteers just to carry them off. And I think it built up the whole industry, because before, when we started, there were no computers. I know that's hard for you to picture. When we moved into our studio, if you saw that interior photo, no computers. We didn't get one for about 3 years, because for some reason they hadn't invented it, you know. So.
Okay, thank you. We are. Thank you, Michael.